So in this lesson, we're going to look at how to bring models into ZBrush that have been created in an external 3D modeling program. So if we want to import a model into ZBrush, we'll usually be bringing in an OBJ file. And .obj is just a generic file format that can be exported by just about every 3D modeler out there. You may also find that you can import .ma files. Those are Maya ASCII files. So if you've created a Maya ASCII file, you can also import that into ZBrush. But probably the most consistent and the most common 3D modeling export is a .obj file. So to bring that in, we'll just go to the Tool menu and click Import. And then from Import, we'll just browse to our file. So let's go ahead and open up our import file here, which is the full body mesh. So you can see that that is now loaded in as a Z tool. I will click and drag to draw it on the canvas and then immediately go into edit mode by pressing the T key. I'll change my material to the basic material just for my personal preference. Now you can see what we have here is a 2,500 some face 3D model. This is just a really nice generic human mesh. It used to be provided by Pixelogic on their website. I find it to be a very convenient generic model to work from. You'll also find there's generic forms available under the tool palette here, under the tool menu in the Lightbox. But this one I've just been using for quite a long time and I just really like working with it. So, one of the things that I want to point out to you is if you are working on a character, you might find that it's useful to be able to polygroup certain areas to work on them independently of each other. I mean, for example, the mouth. Let's say, for example, I want to start sculpting the upper lip and the lower lip independently of each other. So I have imported this .obj file. I'll just go into my geometry menu. I'll add a subdivision level. I can do that with the Control-D hotkey. So with a subdivision level there, I'll take my move brush and then I'll start to try and open the mouth. And you'll see what happens is my brush ends up grabbing the upper and the lower lip. So that's quite difficult. So I think, well, I'll go ahead and mask. So if you try and mask, you might find what happens is your mask actually overshoots and you end up getting the masking on both lips as well. What you're going to want to do in this situation is go to your brush menu and go to your auto masking, and there's an option here called topological masking. If I turn that on and then set my range to 0.5, what happens now is my brush, my move brush, will no longer grab everything that's underneath that red circle. It looks at all the points at the first point that I touch and only grabs those which are topologically close to that point that I click on. So while this lower lip point here might be physically close to this point, topologically it's quite far away because I would have to walk all the way along this edge to get to it. So that's a very convenient way of quickly isolating the lips so I can sculpt them independently, but I don't find it to be very fast. And what's important to me is that I can sculpt quickly and effortlessly when I'm trying to work on my models. So what I like to do is something a little bit different. I will use this topological masking when I'm doing kind of more fine details and nuance in the mouth. I'll use it around ears sometimes, and very, very often I'll use it in toes and fingers. In this case, I'll turn it off. What I want to do is I want to show you how we can use polygroups to isolate the lips. So, to begin, I am going to step down to my lowest subdivision level. I am going to go to the Morph Target menu, and I am going to store a Morph Target. Morph Targets just store a copy of the model in memory. You can only store one Morph Target at a time in ZBrush, but if I were to come in here now and make a big change to the model, and then click Switch, I can switch back and forth between my stored Morph Target and my changed model. So I'm going to switch back to my normal looking face. I'll delete my Morph Target and then store a new one. So again, you can only have one Morph Target at a time. So what I want to do is I want to use the smooth brush to smooth the lips apart, to get them open. Then I'm going to use the visibility marquee here to isolate the lower jaw from the rest of the head, just like so. Now I'm going to go to the polygroup menu and I'm going to click Group Visible. So that is now polygrouped the lower jaw and the rest of the head separately from each other. So what I can do now is go back to my Morph Target menu and click Switch, and that brings back the original shape of my head, but now I have a polygroup for the lower jaw. That means I can Control-Shift-Click on my lower jaw, quickly mask that, Control-Shift-Click on the background to make everything visible again, and now I can just use my regular old move brush to change that lip. I can invert visibility, I can give a bit of an underbite, I can make everything visible again, I can start to smile the face, maybe I want to mask the lower lip again and bring it up a little bit so it has sort of a goofy kind of expression there. Maybe I want to change it entirely and I want to bring it down. Maybe I want to open the jaw, so I'll use Transpose Rotate, and I will rotate the whole jaw open like this. So you see, by having that polygroup there, you have a whole lot of freedom when you're sculpting the mouth area that you wouldn't necessarily have if you were trying to just do it using topological masking. So there we go. That's how I can polygroup the jaw separately while I work. Now, let's take a look at a similar approach for the ears. I often like to have the ears polygrouped so I can do things like this. If I want to grab the ear and make a point, I don't end up grabbing all those faces behind the ear. So what I will do in this case is I will use my visibility marquee, Control-Shift-Click and drag, and then I will isolate the ear just like this, Control-Shift-Click and drag, then press the Alt key. That will hide everything inside that marquee. So there we go. I've got the two ears now. I'm going to go to Polygroups and I'm going to Group Visible. So now I've got a polygroup just for the ears. But that's not quite what I need yet, because look what happens. If I try and use this, I'm still going to deform what's behind the ear. I also want to, be able to preserve this draft, this sort of undercut at the back of the ear. So to do that, I'm going to add another polygroup. So I'm going to isolate the ear, and then I'm going to hide the ring of faces that goes right around the outside of the ear here. And then I will polygroup again just by grouping visible. So now I've got three polygroups. I have the head, the ring of faces around the ear, and the ear itself. So I can isolate and mask the ear, invert my mask, and then I can shape the ear without affecting the faces behind it. Remember, to do that, I simply Control-Shift-Click on the ear to isolate it, Control-Click on the background to mask it, or just Control-Click and drag a marquee. Control-Shift-Click on the background to make everything visible again, and then Control-Click on the background to invert my masking. I will make a document, a text document of these very common hotkeys available for you with these lectures, so you can actually have that as a reference sheet that you can look at. They're quite easy once you've got the hang of them, and it'll just take a little bit of practice for those hotkeys to become second nature. So here you can see I can really easily work into the ear and retain that draft, that little bit of undercut at the back of the ear, which is so important to make the ear continue to look realistic. A lot of times you end up with an ear that just looks like it's growing straight out of the head, which is not the way ears look. So we don't want that. So let's undo back to a regular human-shaped ear. So there we have our polygrouping for the jaw and for the ear. Now let's say that I don't want to work on a full body. Let's say that I only want to work on a bust here. Now there's a reasonable reason for that. If I'm only needing to sculpt a bust, if I delete the rest of the body, I'll actually be able to get more subdivision levels. Now this might not be as much of an issue for those of you on a faster computer with more RAM, but there's always, there's always that extra subdivision level that you might want to get. So if you're carrying around extra geometry you're not going to need, it's going to be eating up subdivision levels. So what I would do in that case is step down to my lowest subdivision level, and then I will isolate just the faces that I want to work on. There we go. Perfect. So I've got a nice bust here. I've got just enough of the shoulders, just enough of the chest, so it's a reasonable spot to end the sculpture. Now, those faces are just hidden. That's all. So I need to get rid of them now. So what I will do is, and if I happen to have some detail already sculpted on the model, if I'm working with a model that's got multiple subdivision levels and I want to do the same process, the first thing I need to do is step up to my highest level and then mask everything. The reason for that is if I delete hidden faces without masking the top level, it'll actually smooth out my detail a little bit. So if you've already started sculpting and you say, I actually want to delete some faces, step up to your highest level, mask everything by control-clicking on the background, step down to level 1, go to Geometry, Modify Topology, and click Delete Hidden. And that will delete those hidden faces. So those faces are no longer there. And if you look, see my total points? Once I click Delete Hidden, those drop down substantially because we've now removed all those faces from the body that we're not going to use. Now, if later on we decide that we want to attach a body, there's numerous ways we can do that using Dynamesh. You can also just hide the seam between the head and the arms and the legs underneath the costume. Sometimes a character might only be heads, hands, and feet, and the rest would be a costume which is concealing the fact there's no body underneath. There's several ways to approach this, but if you do decide you need the body later, you can always put a body back onto your sculpture. So that is how we work with imported meshes inside of ZBrush.